Mark Sikra, who you might know as Money Hammer, or you might know him from the Chicago area, having your finances looked at. Welcome to the podcast, Mark.
Thanks, John. Thanks for having me. This will be good to be here.
Yeah. So my usual intro question that I start with is basically just how do you factor coffee into your life? Do you drink coffee at all? What does coffee mean to you? If you don't like coffee, is there a different stimulating beverage that you like?
I am a heavy user of coffee, and I think I'd say I'm a non-discriminating user of coffee, which is not to say that I don't like good coffee or that I don't know what's good coffee and what's bad coffee, but I don't care whether my coffee is good or bad. I think there's a place for all kinds of coffee. But I do love good coffee, and yeah, Chicago has some great coffee places. We got Intelligentsia and Metropolis and Dark Matter here, so there is good coffee here. For Christmas, my wife got me a proper pour over pot, which I've never had, and I'm really surprised how much of a difference that makes. I really can convince myself my coffee is a lot better now that I'm getting my water at the right temperature. So yeah, love coffee, big coffee.
Beautiful. What's your favorite Chicago shop?
It's probably still Intelligentsia, even though they've been around a bit longer than some of the other places. But yeah, if you ask me to pick one, I would still go to Intelligentsia. Every so often, even they're just their regular espresso is great, and every so often they'll come up with something that's just from another planet. It's just incredible. I still love them. Yeah.
Is Monadnock your go-to, or I'm not that familiar with the Chicago Intellis, but I'm familiar with Intelli definitely.
Sure. Yeah. The flagship one is still it's on Randolph Street. It's kind of close to Millennium Park. That's the one where I think they do a little bit better job there than at some of the other shops. But yeah, I mean, anywhere you go to get intelligence in the city, it's going to be good.
Mm-hmm. Well, I feel like we have very similar perspectives on coffee. You know, I very much enjoy delicious coffee, but I found myself talking to some of my coffee coworkers and telling them that they needed to appreciate all coffees, and you know, it's an anthropological experience, I think, to have bad coffee. But anyway, let's talk about some Money Hammer stuff. So, Money Hammer is your project that is brutal death metal that instructs listeners on personal finance, and this is like part like hilarious to me, part just like super clever and interesting, and I feel like somebody or other has to have called it meta at some point. But how did this come about?
Well, thank you for saying it's interesting. The most honest answer to where it came from is I've been a metalhead ever since I was a kid, and I've been in metal bands for the last 15-20 years or so. And I've always wanted to do the like bedroom death metal thing, the like one man death metal project thing. But it's kind of hard to motivate yourself to do that unless there's so many people trying to do that. It's really hard to convince yourself that you could do better than a lot of other people who do that kind of thing. So I was like, well, what would make it doing that worthwhile? Like, how could I do that in some way that no one else could? And I think kind of joking myself, like, it's like, well, if I made it about like personal finance or something, that would be special. I'm like, well, wait a minute, like, why couldn't I do that? I actually could go and do that. And so I did. So that's the true, honest answer to where it came from. Yeah, if you wanted to reflect on it, and you could come up with things that it is a commentary on. Like, I think that where it came from is a commentary on the state of metal, that there are so many metal bands and there's so many micro genres that it's really hard to find your special niche, and the absurdity of death metal about personal finance is a commentary on how niche a lot of metal has gotten. And I think going the other way, like, yeah, in looking at, like, yeah, before I started to look at like a lot of like personal finance people on YouTube and personal finance podcasts and like personal finance Instagram accounts. And like I had a real distaste for a lot of them. Like, they all kind of have the same like vibe and aesthetic, and like none of them are really having a lot of fun, it seems to me. They're all kind of like dour people, and they're all kind of like scold type people, where rather than just give advice about money, they seek to give advice about your life. And yeah, you could say that Money Hammer is a commentary on that. Like, what would it be like if someone were to talk about personal finance and not be that kind of person? You might get something like death metal about personal finance. But yeah, the true answer is I was trying to just come up with something to do, and that's what I came up with.
Curious if in your travels of like going to metal shows and being in the metal scene, is there any person or any band that you feel like you've been like, oh, they understand finances, like they're financially enlightened?
I think I mean you to be a successful metal band in the present day like requires like a discipline around the way you manage money. Like the band that I know do this very well are Periphery. They're very business savvy. Like they've all come up with projects outside of being in the band to keep income in, even in the year like 2020 when there wasn't much money from touring and things like that. So yeah, I think some of the more successful bands in metal are yeah, especially today, like a band that would come up today, like you have to be pretty savvy and pretty crafty with how you handle money to have a chance of making it. Just because the income from the actual music is uh, low and inconsistent, so you have to be thoughtful around that. Yeah, yeah, I think that if it would probably surprise a lot of non-metal people to know how well a metal band has to do with money in order
Yeah.
to make it. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I'm curious to just talk about some money stuff. I was watching this interview with Vitalik Buterin, and he was asked the question of what is money. And so, to just give you a sort of philosophical, vague question, a broad question, what would you say money is?
No, it's a great question. I think it's something that people don't think about enough. Yeah, as money becomes increasingly less material, and as things like cryptocurrency become very common, the definition that I use for myself, and so it's probably there's someone who knows more than me would probably find something wrong with it. But money is a tool that transfers value through space and time. And what I mean by yeah, you think of how money came to be. Like before money, you had to barter. And so if I have seeds and I want like the skin of an animal, I got to find someone who has the skin of an animal and wants seeds. Um, so what money does is allow like an intermediate step there. So instead of finding that person, I can just find someone to give me the money for it, and I can take the money and take it to that other person. And so what is that? I describe that as a transfer of value through space and time. Like I've never you don't need to be in contact with the end person, and you don't need to have that contact immediately. Um, so that's my working definition of what money is. Um, yeah, and people. I haven't read it yet, but everyone who reads that book, *Sapiens*, freaks out about it.
So,
And
Harari?
yes, yeah, yeah. And yeah, I think he makes the point that money is one of the many like shared fictions that societies create for themselves. It's yeah, we've taken things that don't have value like sheets of paper or even, yeah, even just like informational, just pieces of information. It's not even material anymore, and we assign it value, and we sort of agree like, yep, that's we're going to do that, and society is going to work this and that. And yeah, if you just step back from that and think how wild it is that we can do that, yeah, it's mind blowing.
Uh, I feel like the artist, and maybe particularly in metal, there's like an aversion to money, or sort of like this attitude where, like, maybe if you have it, like you're like not seen as like doing the right thing. It reminds me of being, in like middle school, and you get a good grade on something, and there's some kid that wants to make fun of you for doing well. What do you think the attitude is there? Like, what do you think the aversion to, I guess, having your shit together is?
Yeah, one of the better people who comment on this is Finn McKenty, who runs the Punk Rock MBA YouTube channel. Um, he's observed the same thing. I think it's just broad anti-establishmentarianism. Yeah, money is a thing associated with whatever the man or with institutions or with
Hmm.
uh, or orderly conduct in society, and so without really thinking about it, have an attitude against it, which is not to say that money can't cause problems, but Yes, as far as a non-critical, non-thoughtful attitude against money, yeah, I think it's just being contrarian for the sake of being contrarian, which is pretty metal. Which is it's definitely metal. Whether or not it's a good idea is another thing. But yeah, it's probably where that comes from.
Cool. So I see on your Twitter that you're a CFA, and I also saw actuary somewhere. I'm curious, for the layperson, how does this sort of break down? Like, how's that different from an economist and a quant? These are all terms that are thrown around that sort of I don't know the specifics of.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So I don't strictly work in like managing money. I actually never have worked in like straight up like taking people's money and investing it.
Mhm.
I work as an actuary. And so generally actuaries do all kinds of like risk management calculations, and so that's the role I have had in with relation to investments. I would do like risk management calculations around like, well, if we're doing this and if we're invested this much in this and this much in this, like how bad could things go wrong? Like, are we okay with that being how bad things can go wrong? But yeah, I actually don't do that for investment at the moment. I do it for insurance. So I like set prices for commercial insurance policies. So yeah, like your big company that has like a workers' compensation policy, or that has like insurance to cover itself if it gets sued. I set the prices for that. So that's what I do. Yeah, the role of like quantity stuff in investment management, yeah, it all gets like really complicated. So like when you say the word quant, it could mean all kinds of things. It could mean someone doing the kinds of stuff that I do. I think it usually more means someone who is using some kind of formula or mathematical model um, to take some view of like when things should be invested in and do it in some way. So yeah, it could be a company that says like if the price of I don't know, let's say gold or something like, if the price of gold deviates from this, and this is set by some formula, like we'll look at this and this and this and this and this, and if the price of gold deviates by like that much more, then it's definitely underpriced, and we should buy it, and we should buy this much, and like doing that like dozens or hundreds or thousands of times across some complicated portfolio or something like that. Like that's the kind of work that a quant would do. Like whether it's like just the math behind it or the computer programming behind it. Um, and yeah, like so an economist like might end up being a quant if they're especially talented with the math part of economics and with the computer programming part of economics. Or an economist might just be someone who like theorizes about the kinds of things that you would want to put in those mathematical models. Um, yeah, there's a lot of different roles in doing money stuff and investment stuff. Yeah, so and some are a lot more complicated than others.
So I'm really into math, but I'm more of like a mathematical fetishist, and I'm not particularly good with math. But what type of tools are you using? Like, what type of techniques? I'm familiar with like Monte Carlo simulations. Is that something you use?
That's way more complicated than anything I have to do like on a daily basis. Like that's the kind of thing that I had to learn about. Like if someone said, "Hey, you got to do a project where you have to do that," I could figure out how to do it. But I definitely don't have to do anything that complicated on
Gotcha.
a daily basis. Yeah, I'm doing much simpler stuff like using spreadsheets in Microsoft Excel and just coming up with very simple models where if we say that this thing is, if we assume this and this and this and this, then here's what the price for an insurance policy is. And I think like, yeah, it's hard because like a kind of person who would be really successful in like certain pockets of investment or in finance like would have a lot of these skills, like would be like really good at the math part of it, but also be like really good with people and really good at selling, and like it's really hard to be good at a lot of these things at once. And like the kind of person who's good at one thing is usually not the kind of person who's good at another thing. So yeah, but yeah. So the work that I do is not that crazily. It's kind of funny that like the sometimes like the more like yeah, if the more like big company stuff you go, like you would think that if you're writing an insurance policy for like a really big airline, like a really big like finance company or a really big hospital or something like that, you'd want to use like super complicated math. It sometimes goes the other way, where because the thing is like so unique, you don't have enough information to do the like really complicated math, so you end up having to do very simple math. It's kind of funny how that works sometimes.
Um, can you sort of paint a picture of what culturally like the scene looks like? My sister worked for Aon, and she did some like not quite actuary stuff, but she was like in that world a little bit. And it's funny to imagine somebody that's into metal. She had a coworker that did like financial raps and stuff, and she was always a little bit embarrassed by him, I think. But I'm just curious what the culture looks like in that scene.
Yeah, without trying to sound snobby or like I'm putting down people who do it, but no, it is not the norm to be to be into weird, fun stuff if you work in what I do. Um, that being said, I think a lot of people who end up, and this is probably more true of like insurance stuff where I work than like a lot of the rest of the finance world. Like, um, a lot of people who work in insurance are people who like tried something else and stopped doing it, and so just needed a job and started doing that. And so yeah, I work with people who happen to be like ex-theater people or people who would used to. I do work with other people who used to play in bands and that didn't, and they were maybe going to try and do that for a living, and that didn't work out. So I think insurance has a lot of people who just tried to do another thing and end up in insurance. But no, I think yeah, in general, like there are a lot of just kind of very the connection to things like art and literature and music for people in business professions like is a lot lower than I wish it were, which is a shame because like I think a lot of very like figurehead type people in finance were very much connected to the art. So I don't know if you've ever heard of Benjamin Graham. He was a guy he used to mentor Warren Buffett, and he wrote a very famous book on how to select stocks. When you read his writing, he'll quote Shakespeare and he'll like refer to classical texts, and he was just clearly like someone who knew a lot about finance, knew a lot about business, but had a love for literature, and it just fills his writing and just fills the way he's like thinking about the world. And yeah, I think America's educational system does a disservice by like trying to track people very much into one or another thing. Like if you're an arts person, you can't be in the business, or if you're a business person, you shouldn't waste your time on art or something like that. I think part of the role of education used to be to make you just like a good, interesting person. And that just helps that whatever you're doing, that just helps you be more thoughtful and be more just and moral and fair. And I think we've lost that. So yeah, I do wish that the business world thought more about the arts and literature and music than it does. Definitely.
To get one of these name drops in, since you sort of are bringing up like this like Renaissance type of attitude, it makes me think of Nassim Taleb, and I'm curious if his writing and his work does anything for you.
Yeah, I'm familiar with Nassim Taleb. The concept, I've never read Black Swan, but the concept of the Black Swan, like for people who do what I do, like we'll just use that term largely because Taleb popularized it. To talk about like an improbable event that like we're not thinking of. I think more about Anti-Fragile than I do about Black Swan. And I think the idea of Anti-Fragile gets into like the kinds of things I promote doing in Money Hammer, where yeah, you'll hear a lot of people say like, you know, if you're just holding on to money, or if you're just investing money in the bank, that's a total waste of money. And Nassim Taleb has this concept of anti-fragility, where something like cash is what he calls anti-fragile, which is it's a thing that all of a sudden becomes really useful when things go really wrong. So yeah, like you're going and telling a normal person to not hold on to their cash and instead buy a rental property because that's like making your money work for you or something like that, which is what you'll see in like weird finance Instagram accounts and stuff. It's the problem with that is if anything goes really wrong, you're not going to be able to sell that rental property and get that money out if you need it. Whereas if you've just got money lying around, like you can, that's something that you can use. Like if you lose your job and you need to buy food and something like that. So yeah, I think Nassim Taleb is a good like corrective to a lot of like YOLO finance attitudes that you'll see, especially like these days with like Robinhood trading and stuff like that. Yeah, definitely deeply respect Nassim Taleb. And, yeah, appreciate how he's made a lot of these concepts just part of just common vocabulary and common culture. Yeah.
It seems like people have such an aversion to his sort of like personality type, but I get a kick out of it. Like his books are so funny to me. I just love the intellectual yet idiot type thing.
Yeah.
But
So he has this other attitude. I can't remember where he wrote it, but he did another thing I really like where he talks about like keeping books. So I have a lot. I have way more books than I need. I have more books than I could read, and like. And a lot of people think that that's stupid. And they're like, yeah, especially when all that Marie Kondo stuff was popular, like a year ago, people were getting rid of all their books. And it's just taking books better. And he was like, well, no, like the purpose of all those books on your bookshelf is to remind you how much you don't know. Like the fact that you haven't read all those books should remind you, like, you don't know what's in there. You don't know that. You don't know that. Like, I'm like, I love that. I think that's a great idea. I think people need to be reminded more of what they don't know, especially in something like finance where everyone thinks they know everything.
Mm-hmm.
They make a lot of dangerous decisions because of it.
So one of the first tracks on the Money Hammer thing, if you watch the video, which is like a PowerPoint, which I love, I think that's hilarious. A great way to make the lyrics clear to the viewer and listener. It basically seems like there's like, just a suggestion of like, take care of your debt and then like sort of hold on to your money and like do good things with it that you'll like feel good about in your life, like things that will bring you happiness. But it's this kind of conservative, like get rich slowly type of scheme. And I'm wondering what there is beyond that, and sort of if you can fill in that explanation of how I just described it.
Sure.
Like the fundamentals.
Yeah. The scientific basis for that is it's in. If you want to do it in Money Hammer chapters, it's the fourth one. It's the work that this guy named Jeremy Siegel has done, which is that something that people try to do a lot and we're not good at doing is predicting like short-term movements in like stock prices and asset prices and all that. Yeah, I mean, you can say that people try to come up with all these mathematical models to predict which stocks are going to pop or which stocks are going to drop and over what time frame that's going to happen. And a lot of things work for a short time and then stop working or don't work at all. The one thing that we know is that over a long period of time, and Jeremy Siegel, he does this in a book called Stocks for the Long Run, which I recommend everybody read. He comes up with a series of stock price data that goes all the way back to like the 1700s. So even before like really organized markets in this country, he comes up with like the closest thing he can come up with to like a general like stock market index. And what he shows is that as a body, like as a group of as an asset class is what it's called, stocks return on average something around like the number now is like 6.7% per year. And which is not to say that like it does that every year. Like some years it goes up, some years it goes down, but over a long enough time period, stocks will return on average 6.7% per year. And so this means that if you just little by little invest into the stock market, the money that you can afford to do that with, money that you don't need for like buying food and buying your house and paying for your kids' college and stuff. You can just consistently invest in the stock market over a long enough period of time, you will do okay. You might not get the 6.7% because maybe you live in a period where things are a little higher, you live in a period where things are a little lower, but on average, you will do okay. And that is the scientific basis of all of these like finance blog articles you see, like Getting Rich Slowly and just investing a little bit at a time in the stock market. Um, it's yeah, it's not, yeah, people don't like the idea of like a not cool, like it's like slow, boring way of making money. But the alternative, which is just taking a lot of risk to try and do it faster, can go really, really wrong and can lose you a lot of money really quickly. And yeah, I'm sure there's people, yeah, there's definitely people who have done so yeah, money is not the place to do like fun, crazy, interesting things. Money is the place to do old, boring things. You don't totally mess yourself up. So that's where the get rich. And I can't remember who came up with that phrase. I didn't invent that phrase, get rich slowly.
Mhm.
And yeah, but yeah, it's that's the attitude, and that's the reason that we try doing.
When I was sort of starting to dip my toes into investment, my sister mentioned something about like, because you're young, your risk tolerance should be higher, but like, I don't think this. And I've read like there's this utilitarian philosopher guy that I really like, and he basically says that altruists should be totally like, high risk if they're going to be donating a huge amount of their money. So I'm curious, how should risk tolerance change with age?
Well, so
If at all?
it's interesting what you just said. The conventionalism is that as you get older, your risk tolerance should go down because
Mhm.
yeah. So this 6.7% thing is why they say that young people uh, can invest can take more risk because yeah, because stocks will tend, yeah, the term is mean revert. Stocks will eventually go back to this average return. As long as you stay invested long enough, you'll eventually get something darn close to that average return. But the older you are, the less time you have to make that happen. The point you brought up about altruism is an interesting one, and I don't know. I would have to sit and think about how that would throw a wrench in. It's like, yeah, like what is the way to maximize your good? Like are you potentially maximizing the good you can do by taking risk and potentially making a whole bunch of money? I think, yeah, the counter to that was you could lose a whole bunch of money, and then
Mhm.
you have lost the money that you could use to do good with it. So yeah, just having thought about it for 10 seconds here, yeah, I would wonder whether a desire to like maximally give to charity would change that investment advice. I don't think it would, but yeah, I've never thought through that. It would be interesting. What
Yeah,
other people?
I can send you the blog post that he did on it after this. But I mean, he's part of this like effective altruist community where it's like, they're very scientifically or sort of analytically minded people that are just trying to do like the most, the empirically best that they can do to improve the life of others and such. So it's like, like malaria nets and stuff like that.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
It's Peter Singer, right?
yeah, yeah. So in that general like world, yeah.
Cool.
Um, So another sort of name dropping term that I'm throwing in here is Bayesian. So like I associate myself with sort of like card carrying Bayesian culture.
Yeah.
I'm not that mathematically literate to fully appreciate it, but I'm curious. Are you a Bayesian instead of a frequentist?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The idea of a Bayesian model, yeah, were I to be able to use a Bayesian model to whenever I had to make a model, yeah, the idea that your prior assumptions should be revised based on the information coming in. Yeah, it's stunning that people would have a problem with that. I think the problem comes in implementation, like in actual practice, where it can be hard to think of exactly how you should change a given mathematical model given what is coming in. So like, yeah, like this happens on my job where yeah I've thought of wanting to do that kind of thing in the work I do where yeah you've got like you've got a big company like GE or something like that where you've sold them a liability insurance policy for whatever you sold it to them, and you did that because X, Y, and Z. And then they have two big insurance losses. Like, what should their price be the next year? Um, the way we do that in practice is there's all kinds of ways we do that in practice, but they tend to be like very simple. We tend to just like take some average of like what actually happened and like what you thought would happen, and just kind of pick a weight using some kind of justification. But yeah, like a proper Bayesian model would be to take whatever like probability framework you use to make your first pick, and now you've got these two numbers coming in, and you have to like properly revise that probability framework. That's often hard to do. So yeah, the idea of Bayesian thinking is excellent. The difficulty of implementing it in doing modeling can be pretty high. But so that's where the problems come in.
I mentioned this to a friend once, and he basically was like, "Yeah, I just love mentioning Bayesianism around, or like Bayesian, yeah, I guess ism around people and seeing how their like eyes perk up, like if they're in that world." Uh, anyway, I'm curious. Before we move on to some music stuff, do you have any hot takes on cryptocurrency? Like, is that something that you like? Do you have the sort of Warren Buffett, like this is rat poison attitude, or?
Well, I don't. I don't invest in it. I don't think normal people should invest in it. But no, it's not for any awesome, clever reason. It falls outside of the kinds of activity that I think people should be engaging, which is to take these like big, old, boring asset classes like stocks and bonds, and just broadly allocate what money you can into them based on how old you are and what your risk tolerance is. So cryptocurrency is a total. It falls into this giant bucket of other, with like gold and alternative investments and real estate and all kinds of other things like wine and art and other things you could invest in. But yeah, it's like all those things. Like we just don't have this multi-hundred-year body of information saying like this is generally going to work out. We have no idea how this is going to work out. Which is not to say I'm sure it's not going to work out. Like, I mean, anyone who got into it early won the nerd lottery and is doing great. And there's no, and like the problem is, as much as I can come up with my thoughtful, critical response, like you kind of have to shut up when someone makes a whole bunch of money on the thing. But no, I don't think it's something a normal person should mess with yet. Except like, yeah, with anything like that, I mean, view it, if you want to view it as a hobby and spend the amount of money on it that you would spend on buying whatever you would buy for your hobby, whether it's a new snowboard or a car or guitars or video games. If you want to spend that money, that kind of amount of money on cryptocurrency because it's fun to you, then sure. And if you get rich off of it, great. And if you don't, then well, you were going to spend that money on something else anyway. So yeah, as a pastime, as an activity, sure. As a something to put into an investment plan, I don't think we're there yet.
Do you feel like I mean, like I know that like the Ethereum people and all that, they have like a ton of technical innovations, and I'm curious if any of that bleeds into like the more traditional financial scene.
Well, yeah, everyone, it's very trendy to talk about blockchain, the technology that underlies at least Bitcoin, if not all of them. It's very trendy to talk about blockchain, and yeah, a lot of like big boring consulting firms are doing talks on blockchain and how it's going to change the financial industry. I'm pretty sure that most people don't know what it is. I definitely couldn't explain it. Like I've tried to read explainers of what a blockchain is, like at least 5 times, if not like 10 times. I still don't think I understand what it is. So yeah, it sounds like a complicated thing that somehow makes Bitcoin work, and it sounds like it could be used for other financial applications. But no, yeah, like I definitely have anecdotes of like some manager like asking a consultant to like give us a blockchain, like we want a blockchain, like, and they're like, what? And they're like, well, we know we're supposed to have one, like it's really important. And they're like, hold on, and they have to explain that it only does certain things. But no, yeah, so there's probably promise there, but I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about what it is. I definitely misunderstand it.
But I mean, I suppose that if you are doing it, some of the general principles of like, getting rich slowly, like I guess in that world it's called hodling. That's probably still the move, like holding on for dear life.
What's the term? The
Hodl, HODL, like hold on for dear life.
Oh, I've never heard that. That's clever. I like
Yeah,
that.
I mean, when I was starting to like investigate it a few years ago, the taxing was still like a little bit ambiguous, and then they were just like, "You're gonna have to like spend hours filling out this tax stuff if you want to make money on crypto." Um, and so everybody's like, hodling is the best thing because that affects the taxes in a way, or like you don't get fucked with the taxes as much, and I think that's same sort of compounding over time type thing. But
Hmm.
anyway,
I like that term.
uh,
I never heard that. It's great.
it has a good ring to it. So let's talk about some music stuff. So it looks like among your guitars you have an Ormsby, is that right?
I have two Ormsbys. I have I have their Black Friday custom. It's like one of their like poser level customs where like they rather than just make one of them, they make like 10 of them, so you save a little money on the custom one. Then I have their Goliath, their headless one. Um, I really like the way they feel with the fan fret designs on them, and yeah, they have like an extended scale length on like the lower string, so you get nasty low chug metal sounds out of them.
Mhm.
But no, I have way too many guitars, and I've used a lot of different guitars on the Money Hammer stuff. The album was played on a ESP2 Viper baritone that I really liked, and yeah, I sold it after that just because I played it too much to make the album. I kind of just got sick of playing it.
Mhm.
Let's see. Some of the other tracks. I have like a Schecter Bear. I love Schecter guitars. As someone who loved metal in the 2000s, I love Schecter guitars. So much. And I just think of Attack videos whenever I think of Schecter guitars. And so I have a Schecter baritone I really like. I have an LTD Viper, just a regular scale Viper with an Evertune that I used for one of the other tracks. So yeah, I've used a lot of different stuff on them. And yeah, I have more guitars than I need to make Money Hammer. And yeah, if anything, like doing Money Hammer has made me realize that like as much as I thought that like having all these like unique special guitars would allow me to have like a lot of unique special sounds. Like I always kind of sound like myself no matter what I'm playing. So I probably don't need so many guitars, but it's still fun to have them.
I asked this question as somebody who's recently sort of become a seven-string advocate after recently getting one. But now I'm a card-carrying Bayesian seven-string player. Why not a seven-string instead of a baritone?
It's no good reason. I think it's just conventional. Like I never had the only motivation I had in my life of guitar playing to play seven string was I was a big Unearth fan, and they use seven strings, and so I had some crappy seven strings just so I could play Unearth riffs. But I've never been I've never been in a band that used them. I've never like sat and written a whole bunch of riffs on them. And so no, there's no good reason. I think it's just what I've fallen into. Um, I do think I do think one feels more metal playing a seven string. Like you just have a larger like thing to like, swing around, and just that you're this larger device that you're using to make these riffs. It feels cool, but no, I've always been perfectly fine just down tuning a regular six string.
Cool. And so it seems like you're using amp simulators, right? For the record,
That,
mostly.
that's correct. Yeah, so everything but the album is software. It's a bunch of neural DSP plugins. The album was done with one of the crappiest amp sims you could use. It's done with a Behringer V amp, which if you're familiar with the Line 6 Pod, that terrible red
Little
like,
red thing, yeah.
yeah. This is the knockoff of that. It's even worse than that. but I knew that like Joe, again, the 2000s metal, like I know that Joey Sturgis, who produced like Attack and Devil Wears Prada and all those, like Oceano and all those like deathcore bands from that time, his tones were mostly Line 6 Pod, is my understanding. And so I had this thing of like, I'm going to find like a fun guitar tone. Yeah, like one of the models, I think it's their model of like a Soldano. I was like, yeah, I can work with this. So yeah, that nasty fake distortion on the album is it's a Behringer V amp. It's a knockoff of a Line 6.5. But yeah, I've always been perfectly fine with not real amps. I mean, yeah, guitar amps are wonderful, but the practicality of one, recording them, and two, recording them well is there's a lot of like, I don't doubt that some talented producer could get a better guitar sound with a real amp than with an amp sim. It's whether I could get a better guitar sound with a real amp than with an amp sim, and that I'm less convinced. So.
Yeah, I feel like the only thing I always worry about missing out with using an amp simulator is like not getting the full feedback type thing. You know, like if I want to like let it ring out for 30 seconds before a song, but you know, I'll get
That's
around
true,
to that one.
yeah. And I don't know if you had to do this, but yeah, you can come up with ridiculous situations. Like, yeah, I'll turn on a real amp just to like overdub feedback, or like you like plug in your like Logitech computer speakers and like try to get it to feedback from there. Yeah, you end up doing ridiculous things there. No, you're right about that. You are right about
that. So I saw that on the like somewhere on the cover it said something like you know, ignorant riffs, which is I think a really funny way to describe it, because like death metal, like the vibe is totally ignorant sometimes. Like I think of like Devourment, and like it's just like so campy and absurd. And you know, compared to black metal, which is like a different ballgame, like that's like just sinister. I'm not sure if are you into black metal as well, or is it more you're like aligned with death metal, or stylistically?
I have not ever been the biggest black metal person, and again, it falls to habit. Like this stuff that my friends in high school like put in front of me to listen to was not black metal, and so I just never became a big black metal person. But yeah, the ignorant riff thing, yeah, I definitely like all the slam bands, like super ridiculous end of death metal. I love listening to that stuff. Like, and I think I actually would have made Money Hammer more like that if I knew how. Like that super ignorant, like ringy snare sound. I've been chasing that sound for, and I've not found the samples that get me there, or like the production techniques that get you there. Like I love that sound so much. And yeah, yeah, another flavor of that again, like the 2000s deathcore bands, like the like Job for a Cowboy and like early Whitechapel and Oceano and those kinds of things. Like I will always love that stuff. Even though it was critically panned when it came out, and I don't think it's. I think people are starting to come around to it now, but yeah, they never. They never got the appreciation I feel they deserve. But yeah, I love that stuff.
So my buddy Charlie did this video about like the unavoidable evil of black metal, and you know how like if you like black metal, you have to come to terms that like there's somebody somewhere burning a church and like, you know, like murdering somebody for, you know, being gay or something that's awful, and how that's sort of baked into the music. And I feel like I was not listening to metal for a long time just because I was like, oh yeah, like this is like violent and like, you know, problematic as they say these days. And like, you know, you're a vegetarian, I see, and you know, I'm a vegan as well, and so like it's sort of like weird to be aligned with something that's so like violent. Is there ever a part of you that thinks about that, or are you just into the campiness, like sort of like in being into a horror movie?
Yeah, I definitely think about it. I think I've thought about it more with black metal than with death metal. Yeah, especially when all the like American black metal bands were starting to get big, like Wolves in the Throne Room and like Death Heaven, and like, and yeah, and just people who had not thought about the origin of this sound were just starting to listen to it. And yeah, I would try and point out, like, you guys realize, like, the people who made this sound were terrible people, like all the second wave Norwegian bands. Yeah, but you bring up a good point that, like, I think certainly I have not been as critical of the role of the imagery and attitudes of death metal like I have of black metal. So if I wanted to justify it, I would say that because it's more dumb, it's more absurd. It's like it's so obviously exaggerated that it's almost guaranteed to be taken as a joke. that would be what I would try to say. Whether that's a defensible argument, I don't. Yeah, I'm not sure of that.
Yeah.
And I think you could also go band by band. Like, yeah, there's some of the bands are clearly kidding less than other bands are kidding.
Yeah.
You can start and you can get vibes off of that and see who is more of a problem than other bands are. But no,
Mhm.
you bring up a good point. Like, and yeah, if anything, like death metal about personal finance perfectly, yeah, gets away from that. So maybe that's where that more death metal should go in the future.
Yeah, I feel like, with like Michael Jackson and R. Kelly, a lot of people, have this music that they really love, and then like now it's like you aren't supposed to listen to it, and so like, with certain bands, like I remember reading something about like Deathspell Omega, and I was like, oh shit, do I have to not listen to them now? And I mean, that's kind of like a weird way to think about it, but it's just unfortunate, but
No,
um,
and I think for me this comes up. Yeah, it's the line. Where what is the line between like an R. Kelly and so then to like a Led Zeppelin with what they did with their group, or like a David Bowie who we know statutorily raped people, and yeah, like one way I've thought about it is you bring up the vegetarian veganism, and yeah, like you could get incredibly outraged about anything that about any person or thing that concerns meat eating, but yeah, how productive an activity would that be? Like, would you? Yeah, one, you would drive yourself crazy, and you would probably not change many minds or make much of a difference for the better. Yeah, is that a reason to not do that? I don't know, but that's the kind of thing that I think about. Yeah.
and I guess my sort of way out of this is that I've been trying to associate more with like grindcore. Like I've always liked like Pig Destroyer so much, and like sonically there's so much similarity, like there's a lot of similarities between Pig Destroyer and like a death metal thing. It's just maybe like a little bit rawer, like a little bit less technical.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like politically that scene seems a little bit more like aligned with like punk, where it's like they're more inclined to be like political or something instead of just like singing about eating babies and stuff. So I guess that's my way out, is to just claim that I'm a grindcore person.
That's interesting. Yeah, yeah. Where I've wanted like yeah that scene has well yeah maybe it's more black metal that does it, but like yeah I had a sense that that scene sometimes overlapped with like National Socialist uh, black metal kinds of peeps, and yeah, that power violence sound sometimes got into like weird like white supremacist
Oh,
stuff
really?
that I've seen. But no, as I say that, I'm trying to think of an example of that and am not able to. So I could be mistaken there. But,
Yeah, in my mind, there were like very left anarcho vibes,
oh, okay.
but yeah, maybe I have to get back to associating to death metal. Um, so I sent you like some of like a demo for my grindcore project, Eliminativist, and so I try to use like this like kind of homegrown math stuff that is like largely running on random number generators. I'm curious if you like use the mathematical mindset or any sort of math going into your music, like writing riffs, like in terms of coming up with like sort of like the sets of notes that you use. Do you think about that in like a theoretical way, like music theory, or just kind of like totally by feel? Or
Sure. Yeah, I took a listen to your project, and yeah, it's really clever and really it's really wild to hear what comes out of it. What it made me think of was I don't know if you know about this, but it's called like Databots or something like that. It's a YouTube
yeah,
channel. Yeah. They're using an AI to write death metal. It's just constantly like just an infinite death metal song that's written with machine learning. And no, I don't think I have no, I certainly have never deliberately like used like a mathematical approach to write riff. But I think what something like that reveals is how formulaic your genre is. That like oh, if an AI can just like basically like take random bits of the music and arrange it randomly, it sounds a lot like something that um, that a death metal band would have written. That's kind of funny. So yeah,
mhm,
if anything, like yeah, that I've tried to. If anything, I try to consciously avoid that and bring, if anything, like I can't think of another way to say it, but pop sensibility to my songwriting, where like
Mhm.
I think a lot of technical death metal bands will just, I've heard it called riff salad, which is here's a riff, here's a riff, here's a riff, here's a riff. Put them together, there's a song. Like who cares what riffs they are? And like no, I will try to the extent that you can have them in the genre. I will try and have hooks. Like I'll try, or whatever the metal equivalent of a hook is, like a riff that like is catchy enough and that like comes back in some ways, or that like comes back in some like slightly modified way, so that the listener's like, oh, that's kind of fun what happened there. And yeah, like there's not really like too much dynamics in death metal, but there is speed variation. So I'll try and like create tension and release through like slowing down and like having something kick in fast again. So yeah, I try not to write music that an AI could have written. But yeah, that kind of thing. It's kind of funny what it says about death metal, that you can get away with doing something like that.
Do you just like write your riffs and like sort of memorize them, or do you put them in like a tab program or a notation or anything like that?
I'll write them with the recording app on my phone. I'll just in front of my crappy little practice amp when I'm like practicing, and I come up with something. I'm like, oh, I could use that later. Just put my phone in front of it and record it. And yeah, I think anyone who does that, the problem is the names of all of them. It's like Chug Riff 1, Chug Riff 2, like Chug Riff 3, and then you go back and like, oh man, what am I getting? So. I've been told that there are apps that will help you organize that stuff, but I think, yeah, the phone recording app seems to do okay. There's worse things than having to re-listen to all your chug riffs.
Do you typically start with the guitar stuff, or do you like program drums first ever, or what's that process like?
Writing wise, I'll write the riffs first. Yeah, as far as the like composition, but yeah, then as far as the like actual like creation of the music, the drums have to get programmed first before you can record anything. Or otherwise you would have to record the riffs to a click, and that would be that would probably result in a different feel than recording them over the actual drum parts. The other thing, and this is something that Ola England, who runs like a Metal Gear review channel,
is that Will It Chug guy?
Was that?
He's the Will It Chug guy?
Yes, yeah. He does the Will It Chug series. I adore him. He's wonderful. He has said, and I this was great to have discovered from him, is you don't know whether a riff is good or not until you have sorted out what the drums are underneath it. Like a lot of like epic, awesome metal riffs are really very basic guitar parts, but it's the accompanying drums that have made them like really classic metal riffs. So until you've settled on what your drums are under riff, you don't know what your riff is, and you don't know whether your riff is good or not yet. So yeah, I like trying to come up with the drums and hear that, and then be like, okay, yeah, that's part of the song. Yeah.
Cool. What else are you listening to these days in terms of metal or anything else?
What did I listen to recently? What did I just put on? Oh, it's not a. There's a slam metal. So yeah, the slam metal is like one of the more ignorant kinds of death metal. There's a Instagram account called Slam Worldwide, and they have a Spotify playlist that's just wall to wall, just ignorant, heavy stuff, and I've been enjoying it recently. I'm ashamed to say that. Yeah, if you asked me to name a band from it, like I couldn't do that, because it's sort of not the. At least for me, it's not the point. It's that someone has put together has curated this collection of just incredibly ignorant slam metal. So I've been listening to that a lot recently. I don't know if this is the place to talk about it, but I'm a huge Taylor Swift fan, and so the fact that I got 2 Taylor Swift albums this year is something I was really happy about. So I've been listening to those, just wall-to-wall bangers, as I'm sure you can imagine.
Interesting.
The Carcass EP that came out in 2020, I really like that. What did I try? I've been trying to like fill in gaps in my like metal now. Like there are like classic metal albums, like Death albums that I still haven't heard, and like Atheist albums that I still haven't heard, just because I didn't buy them as a kid.
Hmm.
So just trying to totally fill in like gaps in my like metal listening that should be filled. But yeah, that's I'm kind of all over the place with stuff.
Does the sort of like technical stuff do anything for you?
Yeah, to some extent, I love Archspire. If you're familiar with
Hmm.
them, they're a Canadian band. They're from Vancouver, but they're one of the more virtuosic tech bands. Um, and yeah, I really like them just because yeah, they're super tech, but they're also good songwriters. And yeah, the kinds of things we talked about, where they try and have good songwriting practices, there's hooks and all the tech stuff, and the vocals are just as techy as everything else and go appropriately with everything. Um, but no, not too many tech bands. You know, like so. I think that stuff can get into the riff salad kind of thing that we were talking about.
Hmm. I guess the last few things I'll ask you, I guess, are just about other sort of media diet stuff for you. In terms of like financial reading, are there books that you suggest or blogs that you suggest, sort of like personalities that think are interesting to follow?
Yeah, so the guy I mentioned when we were talking about the Money Hammer stuff, Jeremy Siegel, his classic book that he just keeps updating like every few years is called Stocks for the Long Run. Uh, yeah, definitely recommend that to anyone who like wants to understand the kinds of stuff that we were talking about earlier. Yeah, as far as like first investment books, like it's a book that has an agenda, but it's also a good intro. Is this book called A Random Walk Down Wall Street? It's by this guy named Burton Malkiel, Malkiel, I believe. Um, and yeah, it's arguing about a very specific concept in like finance theory, but in order to do it, he does like a broad intro of like thinking about finance that I think is really helpful, and I think is one of the better introductions to it. Trying to think of other stuff.
I've
Is
noticed
it?
that
Go ahead.
I noticed that you have a few like singles that are like basically like comments on like Bloomberg articles. Do you read Tyler Cowen or Noah Smith at all?
I'm not familiar with them. No, where do they put their work?
I'm more familiar with Tyler Cowen, but he writes a lot of opinion articles for Bloomberg. But then he has like Marginal Revolution, which is like an economics blog that teaches economics. Noah Smith, I'm not as familiar with, but he's just like somebody I follow on Twitter who seems to have a bunch of hot takes on things.
Okay.
Yeah, but I mean, just curious. They meant anything to you?
Yeah, I don't think there's any like yeah, as far as like commenters or like podcasters, I couldn't name a finance person that I'm like a big follower of. Yeah, the songs about the articles were just, yeah, it was just something across that came across my Twitter feed or something like that. And I just remember thinking like, I don't disagree with that. I should write a song about that. I'm like, oh, well, I can actually do that now. Like that's what I guess that's what I'll do. That's that's the project. But yeah, so I think yeah, again, maybe it's my bias more towards like big old boring stuff when it comes to finance. Like I still love big old classic books when it comes to thinking about what to do with your money.
Cool. Well, I feel like that's most of what I wanted to ask you. So you got the albums. Where can people find that? Bandcamp? Is that the best place?
Yeah, so I might say the best place to check the stuff out is on the YouTube with the lyric videos, which are PowerPoint presentations.
Hmm.
I should say, yeah, not going back to like where when I was thinking of this, like it was fun when I thought of the idea for this, like it just the idea like solved all kinds of problems. So like I was like, well, I'm not going to be able to do death metal art. I can't draw like awesome death metal stuff. I'm like, oh, but if it's like finance theme, like the art would be like something an HR department would do. And I'm like, well, I can't make lyric videos. I don't know anything about that. I'm like, oh, but if it were a finance company, they would do it with PowerPoint. So I'll just do it with PowerPoint. And so yeah, it was interesting how like the idea solved a lot of problems that I had. But yeah, so I think it's fun for people to check it out on YouTube for the first time so they see what the lyrics are. But yeah, it's available on Bandcamp also, and then I'm on all the major streaming services, so on Spotify, Apple Music, and all that. But yeah, really glad that people are seeming to enjoy it and getting out there to some people, and that people are entertained and possibly informed by it. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun to do.
Yeah, I feel like if you didn't have the videos with the lyrics, then like I might not know that's about finance, but it's the music on its own is great. So yeah, it's very enjoyable.
Thank you. Thank you for finding it respectable death metal. That's what I strive for, to make at least half decent death metal for to convey the personal finance message.
Have you gotten a sense from anybody who listens to it, like if they've actually like sort of like been going into it for the finance reasons? Like, how have people engaged with that?
There's been a handful of people that I think the people who engage with it most are people who get like both sides of it, who kind of like get the joke, like why it's kind of funny. The most prominent person who reached out to me was Tom Draper from Carcass. So not Bill Steele, not the guitarist that's been with Carcass for all of their history, but one of the newer members of Carcass. I guess his wife works in finance, so he got the joke and like understood what I was doing and thought that was good. The blog Invisible Oranges, one of their writers put me on their top 10 metal albums of 2020 list. So yeah, sort of saying that like, yeah, it's interesting because it's about personal finance, but the death metal is respectable. So I was honored to get that from them. But no, like I think more of the audience is coming from the metal community than the finance community. I think it's like any other kind of extreme genre of music where when you play it to an outsider, like they're not like it's not even a matter of whether they like or don't like it. They just don't quite know what's going on. Yeah, they'll be like, why is there no singing? Like, what is that voice? Like, if you've never heard the Cookie Monster voice, like the extreme metal voice, you just don't have a context for understanding like why a person would be doing that. So I have gotten a lot less attention from finance people being like, wow, this is an interesting way to present finance. It's more from metal people being like, wow, that's a funny thing to use death metal for.
Is the dream to sort of like hear from somebody who's a listener who has like said like, oh, hey Mark, I paid off my debt and like now I have like 6.7% returns. Is that the dream?
Well, I think the dream is if people would be like, wow, I avoided doing something really reckless because of you. Like I was gonna YOLO all my money on Tesla options or something like that in Robinhood, and instead I just bought some of an index fund, and I didn't lose all my money. That would be, yeah, that's a goal. I mean, another goal I have would be to get sponsorship from like a big old boring financial, like some big old brokerage company like Vanguard or something like that. Because I think one of the reasons that young people are using alternative investment platforms like Robinhood is the big old boring investment platforms haven't bothered to reach out to young people. And I think if they would realize that there's ways to do that, they could have more success there. And yeah, I would love to be a way of encouraging young people to do more boring things with their money.
Very cool. Well, that sounds good to me. I think we can end this here then. Thanks for joining me, Mark. This has been a fun chat.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I've enjoyed talking as well. And yeah, look forward to speaking sometime in the future.
Yeah, sounds good. Let me know when you put out the next record.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, John.
Yeah, adios.